Hi guys, my name is Mark, and today we'll look into the case of Margaret Peggy Beck. On Sunday, the 16th of August, 1963, a teenage scout aide was found dead in her solo tent at the Flying G Ranch Girl Scout camp. The young girl was 16 years old. Her name was Margaret Peggy Beck. This dark Colorado case finally had light shed upon it in the year 2020, 57 years later. Peggy was a beautiful young girl who loved life. She was loving and protective of her family, especially us. These were the words from a joint statement given by her three younger sisters. Peggy was born into the arms of loving parents, Clarence Vincent Beck and Merla Lee Stauffer Beck, on the 22nd of November, 1946. She was the oldest of four daughters, and the girls lived with their parents in Edgewood, Colorado. It could have been the first daughter, Jean, but Peggy was always known to be responsible. It was not a surprise that her sisters looked up to her remarkably. The Becks were a happy middle-class family. During her lifetime, she was a senior student at North Denver High School. Peggy was a good kid. She loved kids, and kids seemed to love her too. Her schoolmates, friends, and teachers loved her. She had been a Girl Scout since the age of 9, and according to her parents, one thing she had always wanted was to become one of the camp counselors. She was excited about camp in the August of 1963. Her dream had come true. She did become a counselor, but Peggy never got to be anything else. The 5-day camping trip had come to an end. It was the final night of the Flying G Ranch Girl Scouts in the Pike National Forest. As per custom, they had a campfire sing-along after dinner, and around midnight, supervisors called lights out. Accompanied by the adult supervisors, each girl crawled into her tent and wrapped in her sleeping bag. All the girls had tent mates except Peggy. She slept alone that night. The next adjournment was going to be breakfast. Morning came. The schedule for the day included breakfast, packing, cleanup, and departure. Peggy failed to appear for breakfast. There wasn't a cause for alarm. Maybe she was coming down with something like Claudia had. Peggy had been sharing a tent with her tent mate Claudia Schride for 4 days. Claudia had caught a cold on the last day of camp, so she had to spend her last night at the infirmary. Packing was next on the schedule, so Claudia returned to the tent to prepare for the journey home. Peggy wasn't moving. Claudia thought her tent mate was still sleeping, so she tried to wake her. Peggy never woke up that morning. She never opened her eyes again. The day continued as scheduled. The supervisors instructed Claudia to pack up Penny's belongings and take them home. The Girl Scouts and supervisors took down Peggy's tent and cleared the campgrounds. After all the girls had left for their homes, the scout leaders of the Flying G Ranch Girl Scouts called the police post-cleanup and post-departure, which was 8 hours after they realized she was dead. In the beginning, everyone thought that Peggy had died of natural causes. Claudia saw nothing wrong or of concern when she entered their tent. The supervisors didn't notice anything either when they were alerted. There wasn't any bleeding or outward signs of struggle. It didn't look like a crime scene. She was found zipped and seemingly peaceful in her sleeping bag. If left alone, one would think Peggy was still asleep. It didn't look like foul play. A potentially healthy 16-year-old has passed away from an underlying illness, a tent-related factor, natural disaster, or some other phenomenon, they all presumed. However, as time went by, Peggy's throat started to discolor with bruises. 5 finger marks appeared around her neck. The young girl had been strangled, one could begin to tell. After her body was collected from the campground, the police noticed that her clothes and underwear had been ripped off her body. She had skin under her fingernails, which inferred that she had struggled with and fought whoever her attacker was. These were signs of sexual assault. Within hours, Peggy's initial naturally caused death became a homicide case. A coroner later revealed that the teenager had been raped and strangled to death. Aggressive was the word investigators used to qualify the initial investigation. It yielded no arrests, and there weren't any witnesses. Indeed, Peggy's murder took place on a campground with reportedly over 50 other Girl Scouts and several adult supervisors. Next to Peggy's tent was surrounded by tents housing 24 campers and 3 supervising adults. However, the nearest tent to Peggy's was about 30 feet away. Everyone on site claimed not to have heard anything out of the ordinary. It was a needle in a haystack situation. Additionally, the crime scene had been severely tampered with. The scout supervisors had cleaned up the area, taken down Peggy's tent, and touched and moved her without gloves. They didn't think that Peggy could have been murdered and didn't see the need to preserve the scene. Even the police didn't know they were handling a homicide case or standing on a homicide site, at least not until the bruising revealed itself. Investigators later lamented that they believed they could have contaminated and/or destroyed vital evidence that might have helped Peggy's case. The supervisors of the Girl Scouts, whom the police later interviewed, blamed their rash actions and reactions on not wanting to upset the other kids. Once the police realized their mistakes, they got to work immediately. A 67-year-old male groundskeeper, Alvin Sherwood, was the first to be questioned. According to reports, Alvin was very eager to help in Peggy's case. He had even offered to take a polygraph test before the police even brought it up. Alvin's polygraph test was conducted and he passed. Hence, he was eliminated as a suspect. Still, on the 16th of August, 1963, a tip came in for the authorities. Someone had seen a man sporting scratches on his face at a bus stop in Cannon. The police immediately took the man in for questioning, but he was innocent and soon let go. Days later, a man was reportedly lurking around the campsite. The officers immediately looked into it, but it was nothing useful to Peggy's case. Earlier in the week, before Peggy died, about 3.5 miles away from the area where Peggy had been murdered, another woman reported to have been followed by a strange man while walking her dogs. He tried to jump into her car as she was leaving. Police thought this could be a strong correlation, but they could not find the woman who had made the report. A couple more days after that, there were reported break-ins at nearby campsites. The authorities, hoping to find a pattern and possibly a suspect, got to work, but it was unrelated to the case at hand. Weeks after Peggy's death, an individual donated about $600 as a reward bounty for anyone with valuable information regarding her case. By September, which was a month after Peggy's murder, the bounty had grown to about $1,000. That reward was never claimed. Several suspects, false alarms, and false confessions filled Peggy's case file. One of the more notable confessions was that of a psychiatric patient who had confessed to killing a Girl Scout on the same campground Peggy was murdered while hunting for rabbits. His story did not coincide with Peggy's case. His confession was termed inconsistent and tagged as false. He was crossed out. Another potential suspect was James Sherbondy, a man who had previously spent 25 years in prison for the murder of an Eagle County Sheriff's deputy. James was out and on parole. He became a suspect after he stopped meeting with his parole officer around the time Peggy was murdered. Months after Peggy was murdered, he was picked up and questioned, but it yielded no positive result, so he had to be let loose. In 1964, a man named Erwin Stewart was questioned, and he too was eliminated as a suspect. Authorities reportedly had interviewed about 300 suspects within a decade. This count included the 105 Girl Scouts and 17 staffers present at the campground. In 1977, during an interview, the police admitted that the most suspected person might be dead. Over and over, potential suspects were questioned and released. No positive arrest was ever made. The police had hit a wall, and Peggy's case went cold. Several Girl Scout camp incidents had apparently arisen before and even after Peggy's death. Some occurred at the same campground and others at different locations. However, they seemed too horribly similar. In 1976, at the same Pike National Forest campground, another Flying G Ranch Girl Scout was woken up to being strangled in her tent. She, however, had not been alone. She thrashed and fought, which woke up one of her two tent mates. The tent mate quickly turned on her flashlight, and the perpetrator fled the scene and was never caught. This incident was not released to the public for over a year due to the camp's policies. When the news did get out, it was let out in bits to uphold these same policies. This incident seemed quite similar to Peggy's murder, although it is unknown whether the two events are linked or just coincidental. A major case that was considered too similar to be coincidental with Peggy's was the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. In April of 1977, a note was found in an emptied-out donut box that belonged to one of the counselors. The writer had vowed to kill 3 Girl Scouts. The counselor dismissed this as one of the unserious pranks people play. Notably, nothing happened. She was right, or so she thought. The group returned to the Ozark Mountains and pitched their tents in June 1977. The very next day, an 18-year-old counselor found 3 campers around the campground. The first girl was found by a trail with a rope and towel around her neck. The little girl had been strangled. The other 2 girls were found in their sleeping tents with their mouths sealed with black tape. All 3 girls had been bludgeoned. All 3 of them had been sexually assaulted, but not raped. The coroner who examined Peggy said in an interview that when he heard of the Oklahoma murders, Peggy immediately crossed his mind. The Oklahoma case soon produced one prime suspect, Gene Leroy Hart. He was arrested and tried in court. Gene was acquitted of the charges because the evidence against him couldn't hold water. In 2008, a DNA test was carried out with the materials obtained from the crime scene, and the results were inconclusive. In 1979, Gene died of a heart attack while imprisoned for another crime. Before his death, he had written a letter maintaining his innocence in Peggy's case. The Oklahoma Girl Scout case remains open but inactive, according to authorities. The possible link between both cases is yet to be proven. Time did what it did best, move, and as expected, the buzz on Peggy's case moved to the next case, and to the next case, and to the next one after that. The dozens to grosses of calls that came in daily and weekly trickled down. Peggy's case froze over, but the police kept an eye out for the tiniest spark of flame. Family and friends grieved, and no one seemed to forget the Girl Scout who was killed at camp. In 1998, the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, became operational, and this was the tiny faraway light in the tunnel of Peggy's case. CODIS was the beginning of Peggy's case finally getting solved. Even with the passing of time, the DNA and evidence that the police managed to collect from Peggy were preserved. So, in 2007, the DNA was entered into the system as a John Doe profile. Sadly, it would result in nothing. Peggy was murdered in 1963, and the system was launched in 1998. So the possibility of Peggy's killer being in the system was already very slim to begin with. It wasn't a big shock that nothing coincided. Consequently, genetic genealogy was launched in the year 2000. In 2019, the John Doe's profile was improved and entered into the system, and this time there was a hit. The investigators had worked with United Data Connect, a private company, to test John Doe's DNA against the public database, and it led them to a family. After a series of questioning and garnering, there he was. It took over 50 years, but her killer was identified. James Raymond Taylor was declared wanted for Peggy's death in 2020. James Raymond Taylor was born on the 22nd of December 1939. At the time of Peggy's murder, he was 24 years old. He was believed to have lived in Edgewood, Colorado in 1961 with his wife and child, although there are speculations that James Taylor might have had more than one child. He worked in a television repair shop during his stay in Colorado. James Taylor, according to reports, had built the ham radios in the area where Peggy had died, and he frequently visited the area to inspect said radios. Authorities believe James Taylor might have known about the girls camping, given he was in the area. Aside from this, the authorities believe James Taylor had no connection to Peggy, her family, or the Girl Scouts. James Taylor's family was quite catalytic in the justice for Peggy. They helped the police pinpoint the results of the genetic genealogy test to James. They had also been very cooperative in providing foundational information about James. A crack in the glass was the fact that James Taylor had not been in contact with his family since the 1970s. There is no information concerning his wife, his child, or potential children. No one knows when James left Edgewood. The only information known was that he had worked up a criminal record in the Las Vegas area in 1972 and 1974. Due to the inconclusiveness of Peggy's case, his criminal history cannot be and has not been revealed to the general public. His last known location was Las Vegas in 1976. The police have since been trailing, but in 1976, where his thin trail ended, no one knows where he is. No one knows if he's alive or dead. If he still roams the earth, James Taylor would be 83 years old as we speak, but a lot of people, including certain police officers involved in the case, believe James Taylor has been long dead. Why else would he be untraceable? Nonetheless, information regarding James Raymond Taylor is wanted by the authorities, whether he's dead or alive. An old photograph taken in 1961 was released by his family, and current known information has been uploaded on the Jefferson County website. A 24/7 tip line to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office has been set up, and anyone with helpful information is encouraged to reach out. An 83-year-old man is wanted for the 61-year-old murder of a 16-year-old girl. The reward money from 1963 has increased to over $9,000 and can still be claimed if the information is found integral to the case. Authorities seem to have deemed Peggy's case solved but not closed. Solved because there is an arrest warrant out for her abuser and killer. Her case remains open because the identity of her killer has not been determined. A couple of other Colorado cases have been solved using genetic genealogy. Peggy's case, however, is believed to be the oldest case ever to have produced a suspect. It is my understanding that this is the oldest in history solved through genetic genealogy, Mitch Morrissey of United Data Connect said. No other case this old has been solved. We consider it solved. In 2020, the detective of Peggy's case, Elias Alberti, revealed that they had spent months trying to find James Taylor. There are no records of his death or possible name change. The detective, however, believes that the public might know James Taylor or about him. The Jefferson County Sheriff Jeff Schrader has made it clear that nothing would give the Colorado Police Department greater pleasure than actually putting handcuffs on James Taylor. A lot of people believe that if Peggy's murder had happened in recent times, it would not have taken so long to solve. It's a known fact that the world was not always an SVU episode. We didn't always have the technology, databases, systems, and even the knowledge we have now, beginning with the mistake of assuming that a 16-year-old who had been singing by a campfire had naturally given up the ghost. The assumption would have been harmless if they hadn't taken the initiative to clean up the campground. The killer had zipped Peggy back into her sleeping bag, and this same sleeping bag was moved by an unknown number of cleaners. Even if the killer had left behind fingerprints, given the level of contamination, coupled with the limited expertise at the time, The sturdiness of such evidence is questionable. There were also reports that the investigators called to the crime scene had not collected any surrounding evidence, nor were they using gloves. The camp was clean, and they had come to collect a 16-year-old victim of nature. This, however, especially the lack of gloves, cannot be said for sure. It's disappointing that the police didn't think to examine Peggy until the bruising around her throat became more apparent. Estimating the timeline, this would have been 4 hours after they collected her body, and 12 hours after she was found lifeless. The true beginning of Peggy's justice started with CODIS. The system was created by the FBI to collate details of local, state, and national DNA databases of convicted offenders, unsolved crime scene evidence, and missing persons samples. James Taylor's only known criminal record was from the 1970s, and the system became operational in 1998. There could not have been a match. However, his sample details were available, and the authorities awaited to find a match someday. That day became closer when the genetic genealogy system was launched. As of May 2000, family history could be traced with technology. It was quite popular, and families were submitting their samples. Some were for the trend, some were for the thrill, and some were for reuniting with lost relatives. The system does not only map out family trees, it's also able to disclose the racial composition of individuals. Investigators all around the United States of America began using this system to track down criminals, identify victims, and even locate witnesses by comparing crime scene evidence to already uploaded profiles. As of 2023, over 600 cold cases have been solved using the genetic genealogy system. The investigators of Peggy's case tried their hands with the help of profiles created with the United Data Connect. It led them to a family. After locating this family, a series of questioning was carried out on the members of the family. The search narrowed, and all evidence pointed to Peggy's killer. Understandably, information regarding the family has been withheld from the public for safety and confidentiality purposes. Nonetheless, it is comforting to note how helpful and cooperative the family was in helping the police, and, by extension, helping Peggy. A daughter, sibling, friend, and citizen was painfully lost. The family of 6 became a family of 5 when Peggy died. Within 46 years of Peggy's departure, the family of 5 became 4, and now the Clarence Beck family has 3 members, Peggy's younger sisters. 11 years after Peggy's murder, her mother passed away in 1974 at the age of 51, according to records. Her father died in 2009 at the age of 88. It is heart-wrenching to know that these loving parents never got any form of closure for the death of their beloved daughter. All 3 of Peggy's younger sisters are still alive, and we're very grateful to the police department for the work they've put into their late sister's case. The sheriff called this search for justice a painful time for the 3 sisters after years of heartbreak and disappointment. Peggy's case has definitely stirred up hope in the hearts of families who have been itching for justice in their own cold cases. The possibilities of DNA now seem to be the flame that thaws the ache in their hearts. Peggy's case is not closed yet, but the Beck sisters finally found an answer. They cling to the hope that one day the sheriff would call and say the words, "We got him." Her sisters haven't forgotten their role model, Big Sister. They hold the little memories they have shared close to their hearts. Peggy's life may have been cut short, but the little 16-year-old fulfilled a dream. She was a camp counselor. Margaret Peggy Beck, even though departed at 16, has taught us to strive for our dreams because life is terribly fleeting. Delay isn't denial. We can assume that this is Peggy's final message to us all.